It is June 3rd, 2024. Lou Orlando, Jack Warner, your New York Rangers beat reporters for WFUV Sports. And we come to you 2 days after the 2023-2024 New York Rangers season comes to an end. Jack, this was not a video that I ever wanted to think about making or ever
Me neither.
really expected to make, because this season, for so long, and even in retrospect, was magical. 55 wins, 114 points, franchise records, President's Trophy, the 1994 parallels 30 years later, and it all comes screeching to a halt in the Eastern Conference Final. The Rangers lose in 6 games to the Florida Panthers. I sit here as a man, dejected, sad, empty, broken, and I want to know how you're doing, because it's been a rough couple days, but we're braving through, and we're going to break it all down for the people.
I don't want to necessarily project oversell my importance, but it really does say something when I sat with you the other night as we watched the end of Game 6. And
Mulligan's.
Yes,
Great
at Mulligan's. Great spot, right near Grand Central, Madison Avenue. But anyway, I sat next to you and I said, Lou, this series ending honestly hurts me worse than the Bruins series. And I said that for a reason, and it's because, yes, I am a loyal Bruins fan. I gave my all to this team, covering this team this year. So I watched the Rangers smoke the Bruins in person, so you can have your laughs. But I kind of felt it coming with the Bruins. I knew that it wasn't going to be probably a Stanley Cup trajectory season, so what happened. They had their fight. The hours that we put into covering this team this year, and not only that, but how special this team was this year, and getting to see a lot of the peaks and the valleys of this team. I think that's one thing that gets sometimes lost when you see a franchise win, franchise record wins in a season or a President's Trophy, is like, for as elite of a team as they were, there were several peaks and valleys throughout the regular season that, as I mentioned to you multiple times, Peter Laviolette always said he loved how this team was able to respond when adversity struck. And adversity struck at the biggest stage of the season, and the one time that they didn't respond, it costed them. So it's definitely a bittersweet, because you still have to say you can still use sweet because it was a great season, but it's more bitter than it is sweet right now for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we spend a lot of time in a lot of our videos talking about Rangers Twitter and what people online are saying, and all I'll say to you guys is, if you're up to date with that stuff, Rangers Twitter's in a real bad spot.
It's a forest fire.
Unsurprisingly, there is not a lot of, all things considered, great season, guys.
No.
We're in a rough spot, and it's a product of the expectations that this team set and the level of excellence that they played with for so long, that to go into this Eastern Conference Final against the Florida Panthers and to come away with it after looking at that 6-game series, it's tough not to say that the better team didn't win, right? Like, if the better team won. Florida outplayed the Rangers. We've almost said it. We've even said it on 5-on-3 at various stages of that series, that the Rangers had been outplayed at all facets of the game except for goaltending, really in the first 5 games. That continued into the 6th game. So there's a lot of different avenues that we can go into here. Igor Shesterkin was amazing. The offense falls flat. The power play falls flat. The Stars fall flat. And a lot of falling flat outside of Igor.
And the other thing that's weird about this series, I think, is obviously Rangers Twitter and Rangers fans as a whole, not just Twitter, but Ranger fandom as a whole, is devastated. This was a special season, as we've said multiple times, and it's not the way that it was supposed to end. But what I think is also weird about this is majority of the pain is not coming from the series itself as much as it is the year that preceded it. I think when you look back to 2 years ago when the Rangers get knocked out of the Eastern Conference playoffs, that was more of the great season boys type situation, where it was a gritty, a nifty playoff run that they finally met their match and they get knocked out. Last year was more of a sour, they could have won that series against the Devils and they didn't. So you were more angry at that series itself. You didn't feel like they threw a whole great season down the drain as much as it was just like they blew that series. This one, it's like the reverse of that, where it's like you almost feel like they threw this great season down the drain, but you can't even be mad about the outcome necessarily of this series because it really was the better team that won. The Panthers were the better team.
Right. It's not the fact that they lost the Panthers, at least for me, I don't know if it's different for other people out there. For me, it's not the fact that they lost to Florida, because we went into this series talking about how Florida's an excellent team. I went as far, I think, on as many different on-air places as I could and said, I'm not ranking these teams. Florida is the other best team in the East.
Right.
It's 1A, 1B for me. I'm not going to try and rank them.
I said to you that, like, no disrespect to Dallas or Edmonton, but I felt like this should be the Stanley Cup. I felt like, obviously they're two Eastern Conference teams, no duh, but just the elite nature of the two teams that we got to see in a series. First of all, I'm also... the way in which the Rangers were outmatched in this, I understand it was several one-goal games, but just the way that the Rangers played in this series, I'm also let down by the series as a whole, because you were going into this like we all said you never saw a prediction less than 6 or 7 games. Now, obviously, it ended in 6 games, but it didn't feel that way.
And that's my point, right? Is that I think there was a world where you could lose to Florida in 6 or 7 games and go, hey, that's a really good team. And I still will say that, but I think a lot of the pain is the fashion and the manner in which they lost and the players that didn't show up throughout this series. Because I think let's just dive into this right now. I mean, this was a Rangers offense that was awesome to watch, dominant for large stretches this year. It was a power play that ranked 3rd in the NHL. And when it mattered most against a very good, heavy, very aggressive Florida team, both of those areas dried up, and the people that go away, Mika Zibanejad, who didn't score, I want to say, is it the last 11 games? He doesn't score a goal in the series, and outside of a red-hot start, or he plays fantastic against Washington and gets off to a good start against Carolina. It really dries up towards the end of the Carolina series, and he has a real tough series against Florida. Panarin only gets that 1 goal, and it's the one to cut it to 2-1 with about 1:30 left to go. Even Kreider, who gets the goal shorthanded, but you compare it to some of the other series he's had in his career and even in this season, Kreider is a bit ineffective. Outside of Alexis Lafreniere, and maybe I'll throw Vincent Trocheck into the mix, there's not a lot happening offensively. They're held to 12 goals over 6 games. You feel like you get deja vu because you think back to that Tampa series 2 years ago, and it's a similar case. The offense dried up, but there was, I think, more of an out for that team. They were ahead of schedule. That was the first time they had made the playoffs since the rebuild. Part of the things going through Ranger fans' minds are, is it ever going to get better than this? This was a career year for Artemi Panarin, 120 points, 49 goals. He might not ever have this good of a season again, and he'll still be a phenomenal player, but he had an awesome year. And this team was deep, and it felt like stacked with talent, and again, special, President's Trophy, all that stuff. That for it to come crumbling down in this fashion, and you can't get past Game 6 again, all that stuff starts to circulate. We talked about legacy talk. Again, we're coming away from a postseason series going, the Rangers stars, particularly Zibanejad, and I think Panarin gets looped into it as well, but maybe he's got more of an out. Whether or not they're built for the postseason and whether or not that's a fair conversation to have, they're obviously talented players. That's the conversation that's being had right now.
I'm always incredibly hesitant to question the fight of professional athletes. Whenever you see even teams having a rough season, I mean, I beat report for the Mets, and they're not doing too hot right now. And I still never, getting to see them up close and personal, I never am quick to call into question the drive or the fight of a team. And especially with this Rangers team, I'm very hesitant to say they gave up, or I'm very hesitant to say, they entirely let their foot off the gas and they just, didn't show up against Florida. But what the closest I toe that line is what I do think is very emblematic of this series is the fact that Game 5 and Game 6, if they played in this series the way that they played once they were down 2 goals at the end of both of those games, just you take the intensity from those closing minutes when it was too late, when they get a late tally in Game 5 from Alexis Lafreniere and they get a late tally in Game 6 from Artemi Panarin, his first of the series. When you look at, once it was too late, the urgency that you finally saw and the physicality that you saw in the O-zone trying to drive to the net, when you saw that urgency, it made it all the more frustrating because we talked about it as we were watching. I think it was when we were watching Game 6, and I said to you, it felt like even on a zone entry where they were outnumbered, or even on a play where it doesn't look like there's necessarily a quality chance being set up. It didn't feel like they were matching Florida's physicality there late in the series. Like I said to you in Game 6, it didn't feel like they were driving the net on zone entries. I understand that Florida, and that's the other thing, is as much as you can, knock the Rangers for any shortcomings in this series, you also can give props to Florida. That diamond setup that they have in front of the net is obnoxious. It is absolutely obnoxious. It is nails on a chalkboard, excruciating. But you saw after winning 2 in a row in the series, and by the way, an overtime period loss, one next goal wins game short of taking a 3-1 lead in this series, I feel like you just for the first time saw them truly be outmatched this season, which is really, really frustrating.
They quit.
Yeah, they quit.
A little bit.
But it really is the epitome of too little, too late.
I mean, and I think one of the thoughts that runs through my head is it lack of will, or in a certain sense, lack of ability? Because even those spurts of urgency, after the Panarin goal, do they get another shot on goal? I mean, you think about the final minute of that game, right? Your season's on the line, you're down 1, and how Florida smothers them. And I think one of the things that runs through your mind is this Rangers team built to handle Florida's physicality and their aggression? Because it's when you watch Florida play, the word I keep using is relentless. They roll all 4 lines. All 4 lines play the same style, and they are just so heavy and so physical that even like the Rangers players that do play physical, it was not a good series for Jacob Trouba.
Very bad.
But he is a physical player. I think Alexis Lafreniere stepped up his physicality. Barclay Goodrow has a level of playoff physicality. Vincent Trocheck. Like, there are guys on this team that play physical. And there are guys on this team that maybe have the potential to be physical. That's been the conversation with Chris Kreider. I saw Keandre Miller's name floated out there. The radio broadcaster for the Rangers, Don LaGreca, when he talked about 2 players that need to be more physical, he thinks, he mentioned Kreider and Zibanejad.
Which Kreider's been a regular recipient of that sort of feedback anyway.
And so that you go back and forth between, is it will? Is that just not in there? Are they even built to be able to run with Florida? But to see them just get the ice tilted on them like that, right? It doesn't feel like a traditional 6-game series. I would compare it to, look at the Western Conference Final. That was Edmonton won that in 6 games. I think that felt a little tighter than what happened to the Rangers. And again, we used it almost as a credit that the fact that they were getting thoroughly outplayed, they were in those games and they were 1-goal games. And you can look back at all these different moments and, if Jack Roslovic doesn't miss an open net, miss high, or if Mika Zibanejad's able to settle that bouncing puck, right? If the Rangers are able to come up with the goal in Game 4, if Mika doesn't throw that pass away and lead to the Barkov breakaway and the Wheeler penalty, you run through all those what-ifs, and they will be painful. I think they'll be you look at them the same way that you think about the Strome miss, that whiff of the open net in 2022, or the Rick Nash shot that gets blocked in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Even with those what-ifs, it's still tough to get by. Man, you got thoroughly outplayed. The other side of that is the reason that you stayed in those games above all else, and listen, Lafreniere played a heck of a series, but the shining star in all of this, it's Igor Shesterkin, who finishes with a .930 save percentage. He's going to end the postseason with 13.1 goals saved above the expected. It's second in the postseason behind only Jeremy Swayman. And
he got Lundqvisted.
He did get Lundqvisted. If you're a Rangers fan, you've been in this for a little bit, it's hard not to get flashbacks of all those times that it felt like the Rangers left Lundqvist out to dry after an excellent playoff performance. The one thing I want to say about this, and Igor Shesterkin is potentially in line to get a big bag. The Rangers can have contract talks with him this offseason. I think we'll table a lot of that stuff. In December, there was a lot of dialogue about should Jonathan Quick start a playoff game? Or is Igor Shesterkin just not that good anymore? And I'd like to say after the second postseason in a row, or heck, third postseason in a row, because he was excellent 2 years ago, he was excellent against the Devils. I would just like to say to all those people, shut up.
Yeah.
Obviously, you were wrong. Igor Shesterkin, if it hasn't been proven to you already, this postseason should have cemented he is one of the best goalies on the planet. And yes, was it 2 regular seasons in a row that he got off to a slow start? Absolutely. And we'll see if that continues next year. That's obviously something to monitor. But if you have any doubt that that guy isn't in there, respectfully, you just got to walk out of the building, man, because I don't know what else he has to do. He stood on his head, and he's the only reason that series went 6 games. So if there's anyone getting thank yous from the Ranger fans, first and foremost, they go to Igor.
And if there's one person that looking into the future you need to lock down, it's Igor Shesterkin. I mean, you look, after a series like this one, there's all the different conversations about like the elephant in the room, the big guys that didn't show up, or people where you're having a tough time gauging their performance in the playoffs, where you're like, he was good for us during the regular season, but the playoffs was rough. Are we giving him enough time? There's decisions that are going to have to be made over the summer because this is obviously not going to be the exact same Rangers team that we have next year. Majority of the core is going to remain, but there's going to be some decisions being made. There was one guy, I don't care who had a good series. Lafreniere had a phenomenal series. Vincent Trocheck led the team in points the entire playoffs, had a good series. There are multiple players that had, Barclay Goodrow had a good series.
Oh, yeah.
There are several guys that had good series. Only one person kept them in that series, and it was Igor Shesterkin. And we even talked about it during Game 3. And we've said this will probably now be the 250,000th time that one or the both of us has said this. It was like the greatest 4-goal allowed game that we had ever seen. There's things that Igor Shesterkin does that you don't necessarily see reflected on a stat sheet. There are things, that final penalty kill in Game 3 where he gets peppered with like 7 different shots. I think it was 7 shots in 1 power play. It was something absurd where he makes a boatload of saves to kill that final penalty, get them the momentum they need going into the final intermission, and head into overtime and win that game. There's one person that continuously showed up when his name was called, and it was Igor. And also, I understand this is the NHL. Every team is good. I'm going to be honest with you. What'd you say was a 930 what percentage?
930 in the series. He was phenomenal throughout the course of the postseason.
930 save percentage in
ridiculous.
A playoff series against the Panthers, I will say this right now, is a sub-2 save percentage against the majority of the league. The way that the Panthers spray pucks, that is a sub-2 against majority teams in the NHL.
The Panthers coach, Paul Maurice, said after the series was over that it was the best goaltending he's seen in the postseason since Jose Theodore, which is, you can go back to, that's 2002 with the Montreal Canadiens.
Right.
So I do think, and it's weird to say it about a loss, but it's probably one of the finest, some of the finest postseason goaltending we've seen, at least in the last 2 decades. I'm not going to pretend like I have an intimate knowledge about every single postseason series, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's up there, particularly in a losing effort. And so
there is another thing I want to pivot to. Did you have anything else about
please.
Igor? So there's one thing I do kind of want to pivot to because it's confused me, it's frustrated me a little bit. For as fantastic of a team as the Rangers have been this year, and by the way, I also want to give my hats off to Peter Laviolette because I do think this is a phenomenal first season as the Rangers head coach. You could tell the system changed, all the different things that you heard even from reporters on a day-to-day basis about the intensity of practices, immediate changes that people noticed from Gallant's tenure that really changed for the better during Laviolette's tenure. I want to give my hats off now because I think he was fantastic for this Rangers team this year, and I also don't think that enough, when you look at their shortcomings as a whole, a lot of times a coach gets blamed and coach can get fingers pointed at them. I find the fingers to point at Laviolette in this series to be very minimal, but they do exist. Yep. And I just found that I don't know if it's necessarily I don't know if this is a compliment to the Panthers that perhaps they instilled this confusion or this, I don't even know, this ricketiness for the Panthers, for the Rangers, but it almost felt like they were unprepared in a way, like systematically. Seeing the amount of different lineups that were out there different nights. I understand it's tough balancing guys who were coming back as in the playoffs after not playing for several months in the case of Hedl and Wheeler. And even having to balance making tough decisions about whether you want Rempe in the lineup or whether you play Kakko one night. There were all sorts of different scratches, but you felt like you saw all sorts of. It felt like you struggled to find consistency with the starting lineups that went out for the Rangers throughout the series. We talked about our frustrations with Game 5 where Rempe had 2.5 minutes ice time. Yeah. And we were talking about would 7D 11 forwards would have made more sense than that because you essentially played with 11 forwards anyway. I'm not saying that this was necessarily a negative or a positive, but putting Wenberg on the top line for Game 6 when you haven't really seen anything like that or those kind of combinations that often. And obviously sometimes you need to try new things to get a spark or whatever, but it just felt, I don't know why, but it just felt like the Rangers' foundation at times in this series was the least secure that it had ever been.
I think, right, two things can be true. I think a majority of the blame in this situation probably does fall on the players and the big stars that you can't expect to win if you don't get production from Zibanejad, Kreider, and Panarin, namely, right? If you don't get production from those three, it'd be really tough to win a series against the Florida Panthers. At the same time, I think it's fair to say that Laviolette got out coached by Maurice. And that's probably not the worst thing in the world because I think Paul Maurice is one of the best coaches in the NHL right now.
He's
Beyond
amazing.
The fact that he's hilarious, he's also a really good coach. I think he's perfect for Florida. But yeah, I think you raise up some really interesting points. The Rempe stuff, playing 2 minutes and 43 seconds in Game 5 is mind-boggling. A lot of the first-line stuff where, Wenberg especially has developed kind of a joking reputation around Ranger fans as a guy that doesn't shoot the puck. And Jack Roslovic, this is where we kind of get into some Chris Drury stuff. You look at the deadline moves. I ended up, despite him not being super consistent this postseason, I liked what Alex Wenberg brought to the table as a two-way player.
Had a game winner.
I think you can look at the Jack Roslovic trade and go, and hey, I think that was kind of going to be a high risk, high reward play where maybe it works out, but there was a lot to tell you that there's a reason that you're getting this guy at a little bit of a cheaper value. That probably was not the best fit for that top line, and you think about some of the guys that were available, and whether it's giving up Kakko, a first, and Ottman for Jake Gensel, or whether it's making a trade for Duclair, there's going to be a lot of second guessing as to who they could have acquired to be that top right wing spot. But yeah, the Rangers got thoroughly outplayed, and so I think it is fair to say that in that sense they also did get out coached, because I do think there's something to, everyone knew what the Rangers needed to do. They needed to get more physical. They needed to get to the middle of the ice. And when you know what you need to do and the other team knows what you need to do and you still can't do it, to me that's a testament to the other team and the fact that the other team's system is stronger than yours, and they're built a little stronger than yours. And that's, I think the right team, again, made it to the Stanley Cup Finals. I want to wrap up at least the series portion of this talk and the postseason portion of this talk by talking about a few players that I think really have created some interesting talking points around them. The first one, in a very positive lens, is Alexis Lafreniere.
Absolutely.
Had a phenomenal season, career highs, 57 points, I want to say 28 goals, and in the postseason, 8 goals. That's tied for the team lead with Kreider and Trocheck, 14 points, and more than anything else, had a tendency for coming up clutch. You look back at his 8 postseason goals. Well, 4 of them come in the Florida series. That was the most of any Ranger, and it was 33% of their goals in the series. And they were, most of them, either game-tying goals or go-ahead goals. And that toe drag goal that he scored in the Game 3 win, it's one of the best moves you've ever seen from Alexis Lafreniere his entire life. And that's the first overall pick talent that we're talking about. To me, with this postseason, he cemented himself as a future star. He's the guy that we spent all this time wondering, is he in there? Is that potential there? To me, this was, even though he had a phenomenal regular season, he stepped it up to a different level on the national stage, and it was awesome to see.
And not only that, we're talking about the scoring ability, which is what you're looking for in a playoff series. But the other thing I really appreciated about Lafreniere in the Florida series especially, he was a pest. I mean, especially the game, I was at Game 2, and he was getting in scrums. He was getting, under, you could clearly tell he was getting late checks and late taps from Florida players after the whistle. Like, he was clearly getting under their skin, which is a team that you need to do that for. The conversation about whether Rempe needed to be in the lineup because, as everyone knows, Florida is a physical team. Not only his ability to score on them, but just his ability to make his presence known. One of the things that was talked about even more so before this season when, people were already having the bust conversations, which I thought was so premature. Not saying that, prior to the season was phenomenal, but just premature. But that's for another time. You really did feel as though one of the things that was always talked about was it didn't feel like his presence was known. Like, this doesn't feel like a first overall pick on the ice. You know, when you think about the other elite stars in this league, you can tell when they're there, whether it's even if it's plays that's going on off the puck. But with Lafreniere, you just saw his progression throughout this season where he gets more and more confident, his physicality amped up, his ability to move around the ice ramped up, the types of goals he was scoring as the season, you know, went on, got prettier and prettier and prettier. I was over the moon seeing how he played in this series.
Yeah. I think quickly, a little shout out to Barclay Goodrow. I think he maybe bought himself some time here, but it was a pretty good postseason. I think it's a reminder for him. This is why you keep a guy like that around. There's going to be some interesting conversations about whether or not do you sell high on him and stuff like that and try and get out of that contract. We'll table that for another day. Most of the individual player talk that we have left to do is going to fall into the negative. It's a real tough series for the blue line. And when you look at what happens to the Rangers and their struggle with the Florida forecheck, their struggle with getting out of their own zone and getting hemmed in, I think a lot of their offensive struggles, I think part of that is how poorly the blue line played. And Adam Fox, I think, clearly hurt. Not the best performances you've ever seen from Gustafsson and Lindgren. Nope. Miller and Schneider, I thought, were very inconsistent. They were better when they played together. And the big guy that everyone's talking about, the captain, Jacob Trouba.
Yeah.
That first goal by Sam Bennett in Game 6.
Awful.
Where Trouba just takes himself out of the play. That's another one that's going to be probably replayed time and time again. And it is an unfortunate conversation. Again, the blue line as a whole, the Rangers did not play well defensively. But Jacob Trouba is the face of that, and it was a real tough series for him.
Yeah, and, you know, I still think a player like Artemi Panarin not showing up, even though if it happens more and more times, you might start to get into this area as well. At least with Panarin, you'll still have people who will fall back on what he gave you during the regular season. With Trouba, it was a very up and down regular season as well, where he starts off hot. He's regularly like a blocked shots leader, and he's really making an impact on the ice. And then you get to around just past the halfway point, 2/3 of the way into the season, where you have a little bit of injury here and there, a suspension, and you just saw some weirdness there towards the middle of the year, where it felt like once he got back on the ice after that, it felt like his impact was a lot less evident. And so there were already, I'd already heard some criticisms being thrown his way once you kind of take into account the back half of the regular season for him, back third of the regular season for him. But I think the main thing is, I think it's true across most sports that if you make mistakes being too physical, or you make mistakes, I've always had coaches say it's not the physical mistakes I'll be upset with, it's the mental ones. And I think you saw not just with Trouba, but even a couple times in the series when Keandre Miller would get beat, in the zone. And you saw situations where it feels like they just got out hockeyed. Yeah. Like it wasn't even physicality was a matter of it, or how prepared for the play they were. It was just they weren't even in certain moments. It just felt like they weren't even the player that we know and love them to be. But yeah, that poke check that Trouba attempts, and then it's one thing to miss that poke check because obviously it sets up the play preceding the goal, but then obviously he kind of sags back towards the glass, and then it's kind of just too late. And then there's that infamous picture of him. I even saw a tweet that said he had a quote front row seat.
Yeah.
It's tough because it's also, it doesn't. You look across several different sports, again, I say, because a lot of what we're talking about here is true of any sport, where it's not always that the captain is the star of every team. It's about the leadership. And I think if it was just play alone, he'd be thrown a little more of a bone. But I think the problem is people are starting to throw the heart argument into it, where it's like they didn't feel like the heart was there. And that's a tough conversation to have surrounding you when you are the captain of a team, and not only the captain of any team, but the captain of the New York Rangers. When you think about the prior captains that the Rangers have had, when you think about some of the captain caliber players who are currently on the roster, not to say that they're more deserving. It's not my place to say who's most deserving of a captain spot on the New York Rangers, and I actually enjoyed Trouba's leadership throughout the regular season, so that's not my conversation to have. But it is really tough when you're seeing somebody who wears the C for your team have a dialogue surrounding them that has to do with heart and how outworked they got.
Yeah, and the last uncomfortable conversation we need to have, I think, is Artemi Panarin and Mika Zibanejad. And to me, they fall into, I think, two different categories where I look at their postseasons a little different. I think, coming down a little softer on Artemi Panarin. I think he was played a little tighter, and when you look at some of the openings that Lafreniere had in this series,
it's because they were sometimes double and triple covering.
They're doubling Panarin a little more. That goal in Game 6, I think, really helps his case of look what he can do when he got that open space. And again, that was
a snipe too.
That's one that Panarin kind of just wills himself to get there. And sure, maybe you definitely wish that he could have had a more profound impact on the series. I'm not giving him a complete out. This was not a great series for him.
No.
I think I do fall a little tougher on Mika Zibanejad, and part of that is that he really holds the burden of driving that first line's production. We talk about, for better or for worse, that Chris Kreider is not the most physical player in the world. He also, I think, is someone that really depends on Mika playing well in order for him to be at his best. Those two have to be in sync.
They're a package deal.
And Mika Zibanejad, for the third postseason in a row, the conversation and the narrative is him getting locked down by a good defensive forward. And listen, it's Alexander Barkov. He's the best defensive forward in the game. He's the best two-way forward in the game. Selke winner for a reason, multiple times Selke winner for a reason. But you look at the Carolina series and what an aging Jordan Staal did to Zibanejad last year and what Staal did to him 2 years ago. And what Tampa Bay did between Stamkos and Cirelli 2 years ago. What Sidney Crosby did 2 years ago. That outside of the Washington series this year, Nico Hischier last year shutting him down. Like, Mika Zibanejad's really struggled with good defensive centers. And again, it's not that you have to dominate that matchup. It's really hard. You're asking a lot. But for a guy that is supposed to be the 1C and supposed to be a borderline top 10 center, this is going to be something that's really tough for Zibanejad to escape. And I think it's one of those things where it might not matter how good he looks in the regular season next year. And maybe if he has an Artemi Panarin-like season, because I think we saw with Panarin, the way he came out with the fire this year, that I thought he was going to have the burden of the postseason talk from the way he played last year, and he was able to certify that. So maybe if Mika really shows you a different look, then he'll be able to escape that. But if it's a lot of the same next year, I think this is going to be a narrative and a burden that we're talking about all year long next year, because it's going to be something that's really tough to escape.
Right, and again, it's the wrong city to play in if you can't show up in the big moments.
Yeah.
And I think that's you highlighted the most important point, that is regular season performance is great. It's important.
And it wasn't even that good. He was up and down this year.
Right. Oh, I'm just talking about as a whole.
I got you.
Regular season performance is fun.
Yeah.
It's cool. It helps get you there. It's pivotal in getting you in the right position and the seeding you want to get in the playoffs, the home ice that you want to get in the playoffs. There's all sorts of things that are important, but they know what Mika Zibanejad can do in the regular season. They've seen what Mika Zibanejad can do in the regular season. There's a reason why he got the contract that he got a few years ago. There's a reason. He's supposed to be an elite center in the NHL. And when he wants to be, I think he is an elite center in the NHL. I don't think anyone argues that for a second. But there's certain things you can get away with on other teams that you can't get away with on other teams. And New York is the wrong city to not show up when the lights are the brightest, because this is a franchise that, it's been talked about enough. Nothing since '94. There's been chances. Those chances didn't end the way that you guys wanted them to. And I just think, there's a role. I understand that there's multiple people that didn't show up and there's multiple culprits, but there is a different responsibility that comes with centering the first line of a team.
Yes.
And some of that isn't even just play style. Some of it is just your presence. Like I said, Lafreniere, we feel like his presence has developed over the season. I feel like just in this series, because on the back end of the season this year, I felt like Mika had a pretty good regular season. It wasn't phenomenal, but he even came up big early in the playoffs. Like, that's the thing, is you saw success from him early in the playoffs, and I think you just saw him, among others, just really start to disappear. And I still have no explanation for it. Like I think it comes to a shock to a lot of people.
And I don't think that it's going to be something that we have an explanation for, because when Mika's hot, he looks like one of the best players in the NHL.
Yep.
His hot stretches are, simply put, fantastic. But it's going to be part of a much bigger conversation going into next season that's going to happen all throughout the summer, and kind of has me wondering. I thought Laviolette did a really good job of changing the mindset of this team from day one and getting them ready for postseason play, and they clearly were in a better spot for postseason play this year as opposed to last year. What changes Laviolette makes to his style or his system to make the team a little more physical? If there are any moves out there, people are asking for Brady Tkachuk. We're going to have a lot of off-season conversations, but I'm kind of curious what Drury does to see if he can maybe make this team a little more physical. Because if you think back to 2 years ago, and obviously, again, it's a much different feeling, but the team feel like they were ahead of schedule. But after that loss to the Tampa Bay Lightning, they go out and they get Vincent Trocheck. And boy, is that paid dividends 2 years from now. So I think it's going to be really curious to see where this team ends up from here. But those are, I think, conversations, unless you have anything really pressing, that we'll table for a later day.
No, yeah. I mean, you mentioned the last name that I just wanted to toss out there real quickly. It's Vincent Trocheck. I mean, first of all, we love him. He's a great Ranger. But, that's someone who I don't think gets the respect that he deserves nearly enough, because I thought not only was he led the team in playoff scoring, I also thought he was good he came up with a couple of big face-off wins that you needed. If there was ever a time when, I think you said it when we were watching Game 6 late in the game, there was some face-off late in the game where you're like, Trocheck, if you ever, it was after they scored. It was after Panarin scored, and he won it. I feel like Trocheck embodies everything, or at least he did this year, embody everything that you want in somebody on your team, which is he had the ability to score, and he scored a lot of goals, but he was also just a walking assist. Like he was somebody who was willing to he could set up scoring chances quite regularly. He was physical, and we've bonded over quite regularly how much of a pest he can be at times. He's not someone that's dropping the gloves left and right, but he irritates the people that he plays against. And I think if you had 12, you don't even have to have the play style of Vincent Trocheck. You don't even have to have the scoring of Vincent Trocheck. But I think if the Rangers went against the Panthers with 12 forwards who were Vincent Trocheck adjacent, they'd be in the Stanley Cup right now.
Yeah, you're going to make me sad. And we're only going to get sadder because we're done with the analysis. Ranger season is over, President's Trophy, whatever. But I'm sad. I'm a Ranger fan.
Me too.
But above all else, we have to come out here and show our gratitude, because it has been
an amazing
It's been an awesome season. I can't say enough about how fun this has been for me and Jack. I know you're the same way. I'll save my whole spiel for the end, because first we got some important thank yous that we have to say.
So on behalf of Lou and I composed a thank you list of several just important people throughout, this season of us covering the team, because at the end of the day, we are a pair of college students doing this. There's people who have been doing this their whole lives, who have worked really hard, and not to say we haven't worked hard, but we may have had a slightly easier entry to the job that we do that some of our counterparts have. So I think it's always just most important to be really grateful for the people that put you where you are. So I want to start off with our parents.
Sure thing.
Jen Kennedy Orlando and Mark Orlando, Lou's lovely parents. Lou, do you have anything?
I mean, first off, thank you for allowing me to go to Fordham. It's not cheap to go here, but my mom is a regular follower of my content, often in spurts, where she'll like 5 or 6 of my tweets from the day before or so, and now they've moved on to the articles that I'm writing at Forever Blue Shirts as well. But especially to my dad, because I can't put into words how awesome it is to, when you and your dad align on sports teams. I know you're the same way with your Boston stuff, and I get to go to these Ranger games and talk to him about what I'm seeing. And listen, the texts were not fun once we got to the Eastern Conference Final. But there was
actually, my dad's not a Rangers fan, and neither were our texts. They were not fun.
Some really fun texts during the Carolina Hurricane series. Some stuff about Tony DeAngelo that can never, those transcripts can never get out, obviously. But It's awesome to share this experience with him, and he's a lifelong Ranger fan, and could not be more grateful for their support of me throughout this entire stretch.
Your parents are lovely people.
They are great people.
They're amazing.
And so are yours.
And I want to thank my mom and dad, Karen Warner and Tim Warner. My mom, just my biggest fan 24/7. I'd FaceTime her all the time, like when I was headed to the train or even when I got to the arena early, like especially playoffs, I FaceTimed her and just like showed her around the arena because I was like, I'm here. Like I'm at the Garden for the playoffs. This is surreal. Anything I've ever done, she's supported it. And, that's it's there's nothing like having someone like my mom in my corner. And my dad,
Timbo.
where, every ounce of sports love in my heart comes from. We didn't grow up, I didn't grow up in a hockey family. I didn't play hockey. I have cousins that play hockey, but that's extended family. Hockey is obviously a newfound love of mine for the last couple of years. And watching my dad sort of re-enter himself into the world of hockey, because he grew up watching hockey. He grew up through some great Bruins teams. So he was more of a hockey fan, but he kind of got away from it for a while. Seeing him like putting aside time, he would watch the games that I covered. And that was just something that just like made my heart absolutely melt. I get every bit of passion I have about sports, I get from him. And the other thing that I'll say that is just my favorite part from this season is I know it's an everyday thing for Ranger fans, but the fact that the Rangers entered the ice to Baba O'Reilly made me think of my dad every time, every single game, because, we go in there, we're not playing the game ourselves, but we want to cover it well. Sometimes we have nerves going in there, like we're about to go cover a game, or we came from classes, or we came from rough tests, or we came from bad days, or we came from whatever. And if I had $1 for every time my dad talked my ear off about Pete Townsend and the Who, I wouldn't even be here at college. I'd be a millionaire already. So every time I heard Bob O'Reilly before they took the ice, I thought of my dad. So our parents, amazing people. We love every single one of you, all four of you. WFUV Radio as a whole, Bobby Chaffardini, the guy who has just the utmost belief in us, puts us in the best position to be successful, vouches for us whenever, for better or for worse. Luckily, more for better than for worse, except for Lou Orlando. But
liability.
To our fellow beat reporters, Islanders, Michael Matuch, Nick Palmer, Devils, James Burley, Chris Carino, who even took a couple Ranger games that we couldn't make this year.
Sure thing.
All just amazing guys that gives us so much more pride for the job that we do.
Makes the banter fun. They're not super fond of the Rangers, most of them.
Exactly.
Chris is a Ranger fan.
Exactly.
But, we're on the brunt end of some not always nice conversations and dialogue in our group chat, our hockey group chat at FUV, but it all makes the experience, and it certainly makes the 5-on-3 experience as well. It all transcends into that.
Exactly. So just, getting to do this job, is already fun enough, but getting to do it with that kind of crew, getting to see what they do with their teams, doing the exact same thing as us. You guys even getting a combo report at the Stadium Series and do that sort of thing, and seeing your passions collide. They're just amazing guys, and we love them, dearly. This one's a little more of a stretch, but I still think it's important to point out. Molly Walker of the New York Post, Vince Mercogliano of Low HUD and USA Today, Colin Stevenson of Newsday, just, those hardcore, big-time Ranger reporters who you almost felt kind of starstruck walking around. I got to talk to Colin a little bit. I got to talk to Vince a little bit. Molly, we always had, strange interactions. One time I got out of the way to let her get into a scrum. I was like, look, you're getting paid to do this. You go do your thing. But, I was always a little nervous, being around them, because it's like it almost felt like I'm working with the people who their work informs mine.
Yep.
But such a humbling experience to see people who work as hard as they do and work alongside them.
And what they do only makes us better, because they get to see what they put in, consume their work, look at their tweets. I've got tweet notifications on for all three of them.
Same here.
And so
we have to religiously shut them off during games when we're watching on TV.
If we watch on TV, we get spoiled. So to see what they do, I think, helps us and what we put into our work. And even I throw in that same lane, Sam Rosen, Don LaGreca, the broadcast. I don't want to jump.
No, you're good. Sorry. Keep going.
No,
you're good. You're good.
Was this in the plan?
You're good. Just keep going.
Am I okay?
You're all good.
So Don LaGreca, Sam Rosen, I throw Dave Maloney, Joe Micheletti into that mix. The broadcasters, right? Which we see them in the media scrum, sometimes not as often, but in the same sense, you want to talk about getting starstruck. the fact that we interviewed Sam Rosen, which by the nicest guy in the world,
Incredible.
everything that you see on air, he's that and then some. Just the sweetest man. Don the same way.
Yep.
So to be around all these people that, I mean, let's face it, we do this for fun. They do this for a job. The word that comes to mind is inspiring, and it's awesome to be able to say that for the last year, for the last season, that we got to share the same workspace with them.
It's unbelievable.
Crazy.
It's humbling. It's unbelievable. Moving on, Matt Mugno, our boy, one of I would be willing to say our first friend.
Yes.
There's people that Lou knew first, like before him from doing the Rangers job, but like Lou and I conjoined our first friend on the media level. He did work with us throughout the year. He did a Rangers Roundup with us during the season.
Great.
Just the nicest guy, supports our stuff, has commented on our stuff, promotes the things that we do, is a regular Twitter, interactor with both of us. We have group chat with him now. He's just such a down-to-earth dude, loves hockey so much, and most of all is just an incredible person on top of that.
Man, all love Matt. I mean, I echo everything that Jack said, and that was one of the cool things this year, and I think we'll get more into this a little bit as we go down the thank yous, is being able to develop some real friendships on the Chase Bridge and have stuff that, like, all right, outside of work, I can reach out to this person and talk to them about Rangers. Having people be so open to that, again, like, you come in and you feel like you're on the lowest, the lowest part of the totem pole there. So to have these people be so opening to us and share their hockey knowledge with us and be willing to banter with us and give us the time of day, people like Matt that made this year so special for us, we couldn't be more grateful for.
Anthony Pusick.
Oh, yes.
Producer of the Michael K. Show, very talented man, Fordham alum, founder of 5 on 3 podcast. Also did work with us during the year, did a Ranger Roundup where he gave us a phenomenal interview. Just, another just great supporter, a great person, a hockey aficionado. I wish I had half the hockey knowledge that he does. I just thought that's someone that I had to throw in there.
I mean, we have to thank all of our special guests. It's been a long season. He was our first.
Right? He was our first guest.
You always remember your first, and I remember Anthony Pusick.
He got us a Peter Rosenberg shout out. Remember that?
That's
on
right.
Twitter.
Rosenberg quote tweeted it.
Yeah. So
and he's such a fan, selflessly, of everything that we do, hockey-wise and Rangers-wise.
And the amount of fun that we have on 5 on 3, like, you really do have to pay your debts to Anthony Pusick, because that's a special podcast to all of us.
That's there.
So, shout out to him. He's amazing, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of him next year as well. In fact, we should even probably use him more next year.
Why not?
Before I get into the rest of the list, this is just one I thought of on the fly.
Okay.
Rangers PR, like, just the fact that us college kids.
Ben Siegelbaum.
So
nice.
Ben Siegelbaum, an amazing guy, really nice guy, always is on top, sends us the notes every day.
Email responses in 3 to 5
very
minutes.
Quick.
It's crazy.
I would like to extend an apology to him. I did have one slip up during the year where I misread. I thought there was a morning skate at MSG. It was MSG Training Center. I said, can I go to MSG? I said, can you put me on the list for morning skate at MSG? He said, there isn't a morning skate at MSG. But no, they don't have to. They don't have to do this for us, and they do.
No.
And it's an unmatched experience to call Madison Square Garden your office. So, from the bottom of our hearts, we really appreciate everything that the Rangers do, the PR department, and Sophia and John.
Oh my God. The best.
John from Seton Hall, Sophia from NYU. It was always fun picking up credentials. I mean, that was fun.
Honestly, that was one of the things I look forward to the most, is that I knew when I walked into MSG, as soon as I get through that little turnstile, boom, Sophia and John are waiting there, and we're going to riff for 5 minutes while we're waiting for the elevator.
I missed elevators to talk to them.
Absolutely. And it's unironically one of the highlights of your trips every time that you go. And again, we talk about making special connections and friendships. That was easily one of the best parts of the year.
I mean, I've walked to MSG. We cover this team all year. I've walked to MSG in rainstorms. I've walked to MSG after a tough day of classes. I've walked to MSG feeling sick. You remember that one night I came home from MSG with the flu. Sure. I almost passed out on a train. That's a story for another time. But you always knew, no matter what day you were having, you were going to walk in and get a hello from them too, and they meant it, and they wanted to talk to us, and they're our age, and they related to us, and they're just sweet, sweet people, and that was just such an unexpected friendship to arise, so that was something really special. Mike Ashmore.
Oh, yeah.
Mike Ashmore.
Mike Ashmore.
Thank you for the laughs.
Oh,
I mean,
so
he
good.
is one of the funniest dudes I've ever met in my life. He writes for the Trentonian. Sat next to us several games. If he's not next to us, he's within 2 or 3 seats of us. Just an absolute scream. Just
Great
a
guy.
really
Talked
funny
about
guy.
food too.
A great guy to get food recommendations from. But all jokes aside, I was talking about the starstruckness that we have on the Chase Bridge, and some of the people were around. One of the things that I love about Mike is how much respect I have for what he does. He travels all around and does sport, covers sporting events constantly. But at the same time, there was no one that I felt more immediately comfortable around, because he just has a hilarious sense of humor. You don't feel like you have to take yourself too seriously. He just had an immediate sense of humor. Sometimes it came off, he had that very dry
so good.
and you're
And that's right on my
and he
alley.
says something and you're like, damn. But Mike Ashmore, it's been a pleasure. Hopefully we'll see you next year. I'm sure we will. All right, this one's a big one. Johnny Lazarus.
Absolutely.
Co-host of the Blue Crew podcast, co-host of Morning Cup of Hockey, Rangers coverage for the Daily Faceoff, some NHL content here and there, part-time UMass hockey commentator on Nesson, former Division I college hockey player.
UMass hockey legend. We were watching one of his goals the other day.
So funny, dude. That was another one where it's this weird contrast between he's very close to us in age, but I still felt kind of starstruck.
Absolutely.
Because he has a very respectable following online, has done things that you and I would dream of doing. He interviewed Sidney Crosby. He's done all sorts of cool stuff. He's there where he is for a reason. He makes great content. He has people who interact with his Twitter religiously, people who, he does his podcast does, I know they hosted a meetup for one of the playoff games. But I say all of those things and you think oh, this dude is dope. And he is.
He is dope.
But you would never know he had that much going for him by the way that he befriended us and was so nice to us. It became almost mentor-like, where I started to see the things he was doing, because he would usually sit pretty close to us. And I also kind of warmed up to the fact of how close in age he was to us, which made everything feel a lot more attainable. And I still remember my first question my second time asking a question to Laviolette. It went really well. It got put on SNY. It generated a great response. And I remember saying to Johnny after it happened, oh my God, that was a really good response he gave. And Johnny was just so happy for me. He was like, Jack, that was awesome. Good stuff, dude. And that that was that was one of the most awesome moments I've had in post game the entire year. He really, I feel took us under his wing, interacted with our content, followed us on our social media accounts. That's someone who just you and I know looked up to a lot this season.
Well, he's a star in the NHL media landscape.
100%.
And he's only going to rise in popularity. He's one of the hot young guys in the, you know what I'm trying to say, but in the NHL media world. But I guess you could take it literally. And for him,
he has very good style. He dresses very nice.
For him to treat us the way that he did and be so open with us and be so chill with us, let's just put it straight up like that, was so cool. And I'm not sure that you would get that from every single person, but I'll tell a couple quick stories, which is one, I think the first time I asked a question to Laviolette, and yeah, I was nervous. My heart was beating. He came up to me after and he was like, your heart was beating there, eh? And I was like, oh yeah. And then the big one that stands out to me that I probably almost brought tears to my eyes when it happened, you went to the first game 1 of the playoffs, right?
Yep.
Game 1, home versus
This is-
Washington.
yes.
And at the beginning of every series, the Rangers put shirts out for the media. And they only do it for game 1s because I think the assumption is that you'll be there for the whole series. Obviously, I wasn't there. I'm a diehard Ranger fan. And Johnny walked up to you with an extra shirt and said, here, take this, give this to Lou. And so that's just the type of guy he is. That's not something we asked for. I didn't even think he was going to be thinking of me on that day because I was nowhere in sight. And he had the foresight, the presence of mind to be like, you know what, Lou's really going to appreciate this. Let me make sure he gets a shirt. So I think that's just a window into the type of guy that he is. And again, he could not have been nicer to us. So it's one of those weird things where that feels like a really awesome friendship, but that's also something that someone I know we look up to and try and base a lot of the stuff that we do off of the way that he's found success in this world. So to strike that balance and to make that connection was, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but man, that was awesome.
And it means something when they look out for you. I'll finish this with one more story.
Oh boy.
Obviously, media is a crazy job. Sometimes some people have good days. Sometimes people have bad days. Sometimes, another media person may ask a question that a player doesn't take very kindly to, or a coach doesn't take very kindly to. Media is a crazy job where people mess up and people make mistakes. And there was a post game where we were in availability, and I was in front of Adam Fox, and I was actually going to get his audio, but my camera was open, and so I got a quick clip. And when we were exiting the locker room, Johnny tracked me down and tapped me on the shoulder. He was like, "Yo, Jack," and you could tell there was like an urgency. And he was like, "Yo, Jack, just letting you know, like I saw someone else snap which I had no idea of the policy." Right. So he's like, "I saw someone else snap a video and they got yelled at for it. I just don't want that to happen to you."
Yeah.
And immediately I got like flustered. I was like, "Oh no, like, oh God, like please, I'm sorry. And I wasn't exactly like that, but I was like, "Oh shoot, sorry dude, I'll delete." And you could just tell there was a like looking out for me factor there where he was just like, "Nah dude, I just don't want to see that happen to you." And so, just it's the little things like that. But we've said a bunch. There's nothing more you can say. Thank you.
Thanks to Johnny Laz.
I'll throw in one because you said it just really quick. Don LaGreca.
Yep.
He mentioned it. You did content with him last year. You met up with him at the studios this year. I got to meet him on the bridge this year, and like I told you when I met him that like it was actually almost crazier than some of the athletes that you come into contact with because
weird thing.
Because it's so much more. I've had bonding moments with you, a lot of my friends, my father, over Don LaGreca radio moments, and freaking Crane Pool, like that. That is, someone who the laughter that he's given us, and not even that, but just the genuine, just like sports knowledge he's given us. Hearing him call Ranger games is a blast, when you get to hear clips of him calling games, but also me getting to meet him this year, him always being, very kind to us because obviously there's ties with Pusick, there's ties with, he's aware of Fordham, he knows Michael Kay obviously very well, so he's aware of the university and what we do, and for someone as successful as him, it means a lot to have him be so kind to us. So and last but not least, Sam Rosen. We interviewed a legend, a man who needs no explanation. Sam Rosen, play-by-play voice of the New York Rangers for a long time. As Lou mentioned, and he hit the nail right on the head, everything you've heard about him is true, and then some. Lou said it perfectly. The nicest man you will ever talk to. Just so much passion. And you can tell, it's already evident when you hear him call a game, the passion he has. But you can even more so tell the passion he has for the sport and the team that he calls games for when you talk to him, which we got to do, and interview him about the Rangers playoffs this year. I believe it was right after the Washington series.
Yes.
And,
yes, it was.
It was unbelievable to talk to someone who has had such a impact on the New York sports world, not just New York, the sports world, as Sam Rosen has. And it was just a conversation. Like, it wasn't a photo op. It wasn't a hi and bye. We sat down and we talked to him. In fact, when he joined the Zoom call, before we could even say hello to him, he was cracking jokes. He couldn't get his camera on. There was all sorts of stuff. The personality that he has, and the ability to get to work with him this year and do an interview with him was like one of the coolest things I've ever done.
I'll just say that you have moments at your time here at FUV, and I think I'm speaking for both of us, where you do something and you can't believe that it's happening. It's when they call them pinch me moments or whatever you want to say. And that was one of those ones where, as it was happening, I'm beaming ear to ear, and so are you, because we can't believe that this is happening.
Yep.
And it's one that I remember, like, when that interview ended, the wave of euphoria that came over me that lasted for a while.
Yeah.
And that's one of the coolest things I ever got to do, was talk to Sam Rosen, and it's mostly because of how awesome of a guy he is. Again, he's as advertised.
Lou Orlando interviewed Sam Rosen and then went on a date afterward.
With Matty Bemonte.
Like that,
I mean, that's a pretty good day.
That's
right?
insane. Like that was a god tier day for Lou Orlando. But no,
the date was better.
But no. But to be honest, like it's just a testament to the opportunities that FUV gives you, and that pivots back to our thank you to Bobby, because Bobby was a big part in getting us that contact and getting us in touch with him. But to put it, that was a lot of thank yous, but that was what was necessary. It's been a magical year. Yeah. I'm already excited for next year, but I'm losing words right now just because of how much fun I had this year. It taught. I'm sure you can say it for yourself as well. It's also even more rewarding when I feel like I'm doing something that teaches me something every time I do it, and doing it as a college student. It's not easy. Like, no. It's really not. It's not easy for the people to do it as a profession, but it's even more so like you have days where you're like, I don't think I tweeted as well today, or I don't think this report was quite. There's so many games to cover in a season. Lou and I both did over 20 games this year, and just it was such a marathon of lessons that I will remember for the rest of my life.
Again, I also lose words when I try and put into dialogue what this experience has been like as someone that grew up as a lifelong Ranger fan. Again, I got that fandom passed down to me from my dad. Like, it's just such a unique and cool experience, and one that makes everything that we get to experience matter so much more. Where I get to share these memories with my dad, and I get to send him pictures from the Chase Bridge.
Same here.
And it's something that it's like 10 years from now when I'm graduated, and who knows if I'll be working in this business or not, but like I always have, and we'll have another year, but right now, at least these last few years, and especially this season was so special. I mean, even like the Rangers beat the Hurricanes, so to get to share that moment with Maddie, my girlfriend, like that was all. No, it was an aspect of our relationship that I thought was awesome and really fun, and all the high points of this season. Watching Artemi Panarin shine and have an all-time season, watching this team have their best season in franchise history, and getting to be there for it. It felt like day in and day out, and cover all that stuff. Alexis Lafreniere's breakout year, being there for all those moments. Peter Laviolette's first year, he couldn't have been nicer to us. Like, thank you, Coach Laviolette. He was great to us.
I would say that's actually worth a thank you. He was always great to us. I mean, we were clearly usually the youngest ones in the room, and he took our questions just as serious as the rest. Not that there's any reason not to, but it feels even better because he does.
I know this season, it certainly didn't end the way I wanted it to, and it's a sadness that will linger with me for a little bit, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, I'm so grateful for all the memories that this team brought me, all the joy throughout the season, even into the postseason. So from the bottom of my heart, to everyone that we said, to the Rangers themselves, thank you.
Thank you.
You will hear from us throughout the summer. Our reporting does not stop, and this is going to be a very active Rangers offseason.
Absolutely.
Whether or not they themselves are active, either way, the dialogue around the team will be active, and that means that we'll be busy. But this does conclude our coverage of the 2023-2024 season. So if you've been following along with us, thank you so much. One last time for my great friend Jack Warner, and that's only made the experience greater, is to get to do this with my roommate. It makes coordinating this stuff a lot easier because I just get to go home and say, hey, do you want to do a report today? But to get to do it along someone that, quite frankly, I love to death, couldn't ask for a better partner in crime here.
Likewise.
So one last time for Jack Warner, I'm Lou Orlando, your two New York Rangers beat reporters, signing off one last time for the 2023-2024 season. Thank you, as always, to WFUV Sports, and Ranger fans, hang in there. I don't know, but, I'm sorry. I'm with you, and go Rangers.